Hello, my Italian food fanatics. Today we're going to make a pesto, but this time in a food processor. Now you're going to think to yourself, he already made pesto in a mortar and pestle. He showed us how to make pesto in a blender. And now what's the difference between making pesto in those two and pesto in a food processor? There is a difference, and there's a reason why I wanted to do this episode for you. Number one, this is the third way of doing it, which most people have a food processor and or a blender. If you don't have a blender, you're going to have a food processor. And if you don't have a food processor, most likely you're going to have a blender. But what I wanted to do was to show you the order in which the ingredients are added into the food processor to ensure that the basil doesn't burn and oxidize. All right, and to create a very fresh, vibrant, and nice pesto, as opposed to having one that's literally, very, very dark green, and that the blades have just beaten everything up. And so I've borrowed one little secret from our blender pesto and added it into this one, which is a secret that I learned from Massimo Bottura, the celebrated 3 Michelin star chef in Modena, Italy, from Osteria Francescana. So no matter what type of machinery that you have, you can make it and know that it is going to be the best possible way that you can make it. But before we go into the kitchen, please thumbs up, like, subscribe, share with your friends, and leave a comment down below. Maybe leave a comment as to what you think is your favorite method. Now, the original method with the mortar and pestle is just a classic method. Not a lot of people use it. I have a couple of mortar and pestles, and so I figured I would make it for you. That was the first video that I ever made, but it creates a different type of pesto. It's far more creamy and rustic in a sense. In one way, it's more creamy, and in another way, it's more rustic. It's one way that I think at least once in your life you should try. Mortar and pestle you can use for a lot of different things. Just buying one, let's say a marble one or something like that, a smaller one, not very expensive. But in the event you don't want to do that, I have the solution here with the food processor. So without any further ado, let's get into the kitchen and make the pesto and then cook it with rigatoni, one of my favorite, if not my most favorite pasta shape. Come on, let's go. See you on the other side. All right, let's get started. Today we're going to make a pesto, but in a food processor. And of course we need Parmigiano, we need some salt, pine nuts, a very, very small amount of garlic, a tiny amount. Of course, extra virgin olive oil. We have our basil, which is the star of the show, and our secret ingredient, ice water. Now, you're probably familiar with the ice water trick if you watched my video on making pesto in a blender. It's an idea that I got from Massimo Bottura. So let me clean up all of this stuff, get these washed and some of these older leaves out of here, and we'll start in. All right, here we are. Basil's washed, and I've grated the cheese, got the olive oil in a container that's easy to pour, chopped up the garlic a little bit, and we're ready to get started. More in just a second. All right, let's get started. There's a preferred order for mixing up this pesto, and that is by using the garlic first and a little bit of salt. And we're going to pulse that until the garlic and salt is amalgamated, just like that. Now we're going to add the pine nuts. In fact, I'm just going to add them from the top here. I don't have to take the top of it off. I'm going to pulse those into a fine paste. This is almost sandy. Now normally if we were making this, we'd next add the basil and then the cheese and the oil, but we're going to do things a little bit differently this time. We're going to add a little bit of oil And we'll take a spatula and you see the paste that's forming? That's exactly what we want. We want to try to recreate what we did in the mortar and pestle, or in the classic version of pesto, as best that we possibly can. So the problem, though, is because we're using a machine, things get heated up, and we don't want to burn the basil. So we have to amalgamate the other parts first, and then we're going to add the basil in last. And if we need to, we'll use ice water. All right. Now let's add the cheese. Not all of it, just a little bit. There we go. Pulse again. Add a little more oil. See, now it's becoming more and more viscous, which is exactly what we want. Let's remove this, scrape down the sides. I smell the pine nuts. I love the smell of pine nuts. There we go. We'll pulse it some more. And now that's good and incorporated. So now all we need to do is process the basil and then adjust the seasoning. The basil is a little bit wet, and that's a good thing because it's going to help us process the leaves. So here we'll do that, and we have the ice water ready just in case. I'm going to do that in spurts like this to ensure that we don't burn the basil. And I'm going to give it a break and push these down a little bit, these leaves that are coming up. And look, we already have an extremely creamy looking pesto, very similar to what you would make in a mortar and pestle. And we're not going to burn the basil. I'm going to add a little bit of ice water, just a tiny bit. And we'll give it a nice long pulse. Let's add in the rest of our cheese. Just to thicken it up a little bit. Done. Now we can taste. I mean, that is literally perfect. Very, very fresh. Perfectly seasoned. It's excellent. Now, this is the way to make pesto in a food processor so that you don't burn the leaves. See that beautiful green limeish color that we have? That means the oxidization that normally takes place hasn't done so. Now we need to get this in a container, sealed, and eliminate all the air. And we'll do that in 1 second. And now that we have our pesto, let's go ahead and make some rigatoni with pesto. Rigatoni is one of my favorite, if not my most favorite shape of pasta. These are very big. They come from Italy. If you've watched my pasta video, you know that these are a very, very high quality. It's organic. And so we'll get some water on, and we'll put these in the water and mix them up with pesto and have a little something something for lunch. All right, so we have our pot on the fire, and we're going to add our requisite 4 cups of water. And when this comes to a boil, we'll add 2 teaspoons of regular table salt, and then put our pasta in. Be back in a second. All right, our water is boiling. We're going to add our rigatoni, and we'll give it a little bit of a stir for the first few seconds so that the starches will gel and the rigatoni will not stick. You don't need to constantly be stirring. You don't need to boil in copious amounts of water. You don't need to use rock salt. All of these things are false. They're misnomers that have been spread that have no basis in fact. I do like to, however, measure the amount of salt that goes into the water. That is, to me, extremely important. But look how quickly the water came back to a boil. That's because there's a smaller amount of that water, and that water now will have all kinds of starch in it, and we may need to use some of that starchy water to fix the final pasta with the pesto. So I'll come back when we are ready to mix all of that together. All right, my Italian food fanatics, our pasta is ready. I'm going to add this into our bowl, and you notice, I'm doing this on purpose, you notice that there is residual water that gets brought in inside of the rigatoni, and that's a good thing, because when we add our pasta in, or pardon me, our pesto in, and mix it up a little bit, you'll see that that water helps to loosen everything up so that we don't really need to add any more residual water or pasta water. It's already in there as well. So we'll mix this up. We'll add a little bit of Parmesan cheese just to tighten it up a little bit. We're also going to add a little bit of extra virgin olive oil just to give it a sheen, to make it shiny, just maybe a teaspoon or so. And so as it cools down a little bit, it is going to get thicker, and that is perfect. Let's go dish it up. All right, my Italian food fanatics, you saw me dish it up. You saw me put a little bit of extra pesto on top of the rigatoni. You saw the snowing of the Parmigiano Reggiano on top. You saw the benediction of a little bit of that California extra virgin olive oil, which is very, very fruity and very much like Ligurian olive oil, believe it or not. Now it's time to taste. There it is. That is superb. It's fresh, it's bright, and that's due largely, in part, to the way in which we made the pesto. All right? That order of adding ingredients, adding the basil last, and adding a little bit of ice water in there keeps everything fresh and nice and clean, stops it from oxidizing as much as possible. It has to oxidize a little bit. There's no way around that. But then the way in which we store it, I haven't shown you that, but it's in a bowl. You cover it with plastic wrap so that there's no air that hits the top of the pesto either, and you're good to go. This is really, really good. It's perfectly seasoned, by the way. No need to add salt. Remember, the salt is in the cheese. The salt was in the pesto in the form of salt and cheese as well. There's not a big garlicky flavor that's a turn-off with a lot of pestos that you eat in America. It's very, very green. And of course, the pasta and the basil are the 2 stars. In fact, when I was making this, I tasted one of the rigatonis. Of course, I always taste as I go along to see when the pasta is ready. And believe it or not, the flavor of the pasta alone, just with a little bit of salt in the water, you ought to try that. Close your eyes and taste the actual pasta and see how delicious it is completely on its own without any sauce or anything like that. You'd be surprised. Pasta has flavor. Certain types of wheat are going to have better flavor. Certain types of manufacture are going to do it for the pasta as opposed to others as well. I would think that a bottom of the barrel pasta is not going to have the depth of flavor that a really artisan made organic pasta will. So anyway, before I leave you, please like, subscribe, share, hit the thumbs up button, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell button, share with your friends, leave a comment down below. Which way do you think works the best? Do you like the mortar and pestle method? Do you like the method from Massimo Bottura in the blender, or the food processor method? Although I did borrow a little bit from Massimo with regard to doing it in the food processor, I think for all intents and purposes that the food processor method is one that is probably the best for everyone in general. If you're working in a restaurant and you need to get this stuff done very, very quickly, then the blender method. And if you really want a special handmade, very, very creamy style pesto, then in the mortar and pestle is where it's at, the way the original pesto was made. But not necessarily. I don't think that people in Liguria are running around buying mortars and pestles and making them by hand. Even in Italy, there's such a thing, where tradition meets practicality. But so this is the third iteration or version of it, and I've done all three for you. So I hope you enjoy it. Thanks for your viewership and your eyeballs and your comments and your shares and telling your friends about this. I really appreciate it. Have a great day wherever you may be, and I'll see you soon. Thank you. Man. So good. So good. I love it. Love it, love it.